All right, good morning to day 51 of the AWD1000 Web Development Technologies class here at Rankin. As I mentioned in the email this morning, today we're going to go over a website that I actually ended up sending to you. This website utilizes both JavaScript and jQuery. And again, as mentioned, I decided to provide you with a code. I thought that you watching me key in code would just be more or less a waste of your time. So we'll go over some of the code that's in there and things that you hopefully realize and understand how to do by now. And after we get done with that, we'll go through Muroc's JavaScript jQuery chapter 12. Let's see where we are at that point. If there's enough time, maybe we'll even start on chapter 13 today. We'll see how it goes. If not, we'll go through chapter 13 tomorrow. You can see the way that it's set up for the rest of the week. Now, also please notice this line that's down here that says Friday will be a lab day for those who are behind so they can catch up. Now, tomorrow, one of the things I'm going to do tomorrow, and I didn't write it on here, but I mentioned it the other day, is I'm going to go over, maybe we'll move it to Thursday. I'll go over the second test that you took. I'll do that. I'll move it to Thursday. So if you have not yet completed the second JavaScript test, the one on chapters 4 and 5, if you want to be able to be eligible to get some points for it, you'd have to turn it in by 8 o'clock Thursday morning. All right. Friday will be a lab day, as it says. So if you are behind, you can hopefully be catching back up. Also notice again, there are no new assignments given this week. All right. As I put here, I hope to finish the remainder of the text. I think we can finish probably all of it next week. And I will hand out and go over your final. The final right now, I'm looking at it as probably being worth about 250 points. So the equivalent of 2.5 tests. You will have a minimum of a week to work on it. All right. And probably more time than that. All right. So your chapters 6 and 7 hands-on test was due a couple days ago. So if you've not turned that in, please get that in as soon as possible, along with the chapters 6 and 7 written test and homework. Again, please get that in as well as soon as possible. All right. And finally, and I know you've heard this before, but we only meet 4 days this week. So there will be no class Friday. So I guess where I wrote that it'll be a lab day. Well, it's an off day. There is no class on Friday. Rankin is closed every year due to the Veterans Day observance. Now, I'll be probably be online for at least most of the day. So if you do have questions or whatever, feel free to email me. All right. So again, I gave you this morning. This was this gym.zip, and I want to start taking a look at it. This is the site. You've seen it before. Now, is it perfect? No. All right. Could it use some work? Yes. All right. But it's not bad either. Again, you can see pictures transition in and out of here. We've got an about page, which allows us to basically change what's showing there. We've got an FAQ page, which uses the equivalent of an accordion. You can have multiple things open. You can have nothing open. All right, we've got our BMI that we've looked at before. So really nothing new on that one. I probably won't go over that at all. And we've got our contact page. And again, with the contact page, if you submit and you leave the required fields out, all right, but as you start to fill them up, you can see that they, again, then go away. All right, so hopefully that all makes sense. Everybody gets the idea. So let's start by taking a look at some of the code that's in here. All right, and I'm literally going to just bring this up. All right, I should bring it up in code, and I will. So let's bring this up in code. You will notice if you look in there that there are about it looks like five different HTML files in there. Our home page, our about page, our FAQ page, our BMI page, and our contact page. There's one CSS file in here. I did bring in the jQuery UI stuff. I don't know if I really used it or not, but I brought it in anyway, both the CSS and the JavaScript. So that's in here on both of these. All right, but let's just start by bringing this up. So this is the index page. There really and truly should be nothing in here anymore that people say, I don't get that. All right. We've talked meta tags kind of to death. We really have. All right. So that shouldn't be new. You know what a title tag is. You can see we've come in here and we brought in jQuery and I put it up here. I think it works fine there. Brought in Bootstrap. All right. And we have our own style sheet in here. And I also put in a favicon. So you may or may not have noticed that. But what that favicon, if you look up here, that isn't the favicon. The favicons up here. All right. And it's the thing for the gym. Okay. When we look in here, I tried to make this as much as possible an HTML5 semantic compliant document. So you'll notice we have a header section. And in the header section, we have a div. All right, so in the header section, again, we have a div, actually a couple divs. All right, could have done a better job, I guess, of straightening this out, but it's not too bad either. All right, so we've got our navigation bar, which will be, of course, the same on every page. I didn't do anything in here with making something current. We could have done that. I may ask you to do something like that when you take your test, your final. All right, then everything is in main, and you'll notice that I've got a section, and then I've got an aside. All right, and that's what's in main, and then we've got a footer, and then here's our link to jQuery down here, and up there, I think that was our link to the jQuery UI that was up there. All right, so again, there shouldn't be anything surprising in here. All right. When you take a look, notice in here section class equal index, H1 class equal index, H2 class equal index, etc. And you can see then that I'm using the class in multiple places. We've talked about this really since almost day one in here, that if you're going to use something on multiple places on a web page, you make it a class. On the other hand, if you're only going to use it once, you make it an ID. All right, again, nothing really new in there. All right. So again, you can see on the main page, what do we have in here? Well, we've got a whole bunch of junk, some images for the main page, etc. All right. And some text. This is just garbage text that I put in here. And again, you have seen this before. It is by no means perfect. I don't mean to say it is. I didn't spend much time on this. But if you do look at this page, at least, it pretty much does the responsive thing pretty well. All right. And you can go and you can notice that the about page again, also not too bad. The FAQ, not bad. You know, again, you might have your own feelings on it. The one that I should have done some more work on and didn't. All right, when you look up here, this is just so big because I've got the size of the browser increased. But the BMI, this was not done well. All right, you'll notice again with this, I should have taken the sizes and made them smaller. It probably would have been okay then. And the contact form is not bad either. One of the reasons that I decided to provide this stuff for you was, again, if you needed some kind of a template as you are setting up your site next week. And if you didn't hear this previously, sometime early next week, this weekend, I'm going to write the final. The final will involve JavaScript, it'll involve HTML, and it'll involve CSS. It'll be expected that the page will be responsive. You can do that any way you want. And what I mean is you can just write media queries. You can use Flexbox. If you did take the time to go and read the grid stuff, you can use that. You can use Bootstrap, but the idea is it'll have to be responsive. All right. So let's actually do it from the end. And what I mean is, let's look at the code for the contact form, right? So I'm going to bring this up again inside of code and come here and go to the JavaScript. And here is contact.js. Now, again, many different ways this can be written. Hopefully you notice if you look in here, this is written using jQuery. All right. It didn't have to be. All right. When you take your final, you will have some kind of a page similar to the page that we're looking at the code for right now. And I don't care when you do this, I'm going to expect that you don't even know jQuery and you're going to use regular vanilla JavaScript to do your actual form validation. Now, that said, some of the stuff that's in here, you'll actually be able to either use or use as a template. So as you can see what we have in here, all right, we've got we've got 4 different constants. This one, it doesn't even look like it's being used. All right, I thought that I did, but I guess not. So we can probably comment that one out. And I tried, as you can see, to come in here and comment at least some places along the way. All right. Now, this pretty much is the way that it looks. Okay. When you come in and do it in vanilla JavaScript. Again, we would have come up on the top in vanilla JavaScript and either use query selector or get element by ID, and we would have taken the $ and set it up so that it was an alias. All right. But the stuff that's in here should now be making sense, such as if you look in here, well, what's the first thing that we're doing here? We're preventing, this is a contact form and it's got a submit button, but we're telling it when you click it, don't go off to another site. All right. And then the stuff that's in here, again, you'd have to do a little bit of rewrite, but it's pretty much set up the way that it's set up for either jQuery or vanilla JavaScript. So what are we doing? We're telling it in line 18 there to grab everything that's in the text box with an ID of first name, grab the value, trim it. Remember what trim does is it removes any leading or trailing blank spaces. And then it says if it is equal, we could do equal or we could put a triple equal sign there. Either way will work just fine. But if the first name is empty, all right, then the text that's next to it is going to come up and it's going to say first name field is required. All right. And since it is invalid now, we set invalid to false. If we get down to here, you know that we put something in the first name. The only validation that's being done in here is there something in that text box? So if you put 37 in there, all right, if you put 37 in there for a first name, it's going to accept it. It would be possible to go in and write like a regular expression pattern that would only accept A through Z uppercase or A through Z lowercase, something like that. And, anything else would be unacceptable. I didn't do that. All right. So right here, this is just making sure that there's that asterisk that was out there for the error message is no longer there. We're replacing that asterisk in the code you see highlighted here with nothing, the empty string. And since we know now that we've got a valid value, all right, this, we're saying first name is equal to that value. Now, even if it was bad, it's going to be okay because we've already set is valid to false here. Then we do the same thing basically, but we replace first name with last name. All right. Then again, we do the same thing. And we replace last name now with address. Then we do it again with city. So it's really when you're doing some work on, when you're doing work on string fields like this, not really very difficult. All right. Because all we're checking for is the presence or absence of something. Now, one thing I didn't do in here is we could have set max lengths. All right, we could have set a max length for the first name, for the last name, the address, the city, the state, etc. We could have done all that stuff. All right. But I just didn't really feel the need to on here. All right, then state is a little bit different. You may or may not have noticed that when we bring that one up, the state is a drop down. I added the District of Columbia there. And we also have there, I think that's the only one. So I think there's 51 entries in there. Of course, if you didn't want that, you could take that one out. It's no biggie, really, one way or the other. All right. But when you look in here, it says if state dropdown dot length equals 0 or state dropdown dot val equals nothing. All right. What is, basically we're saying if nothing is selected, well, that actually shouldn't happen. But notice what happens when we run this. So if I do run this and I put in my first name and I put in my last name and I put in the address and I put in the city, but I leave the state empty, all right, state field is required. All right, so it is checking right there. And if that is the entry that's in there, it is not allowing it. All right. One of the reasons too that I gave you this code was that I decided, I don't want you to have to worry about keying in all of that stuff in there for the states. All right. So you've got it in there already. All right. And it's in here. Well, it's in the contact.html. We'll look at that in a bit. All right. Zip code, if you take a look in there, okay, again, all that was put in there was this. This is a check for nothing in there, but this is a regular expression pattern right there. All right. Regular expression patterns typically they're put, and they really should be put, between delimiters. The delimiter to start is right here. The delimiter to end is right there. This says right here that the actual pattern itself starts with, and this says the actual pattern itself ends with. So what does this mean here? This means 5 digits. All right, that's what it means, 5 digits. We're not checking. So if you said, well, you couldn't have a zip code 00000, we're not checking for that. All right, we could, but we're not. It would have been a much more extensive regular expression pattern. All right. So this means, since it's in parens right there, it's optional. But if we include it, it must have a hyphen and 4 digits. So those are the only 2 acceptable patterns in here. So if we leave it blank, we're saying zip code field is required. So notice this is what we're checking. That's the regular expression pattern. And we're saying to test it on the field that's called zip. All right. And if it fails, that's the less than, or the not equal to rather. If it fails, then we're going to give it a different message, IZF. And what the heck is IZF? Invalid zip code format. All right. So that'll handle that. And again, if either it's empty or this fails, we're setting is valid to false. If we leave everything off on that form that you just saw, is valid is going to be set to false multiple times. It doesn't hurt anything to do that. Finally, if we get down to here, it was okay. All right. And then we do a similar thing with our phone. All right. And it's pretty ugly, that pattern that's in there. But the pattern that's in there is, I believe, it is number, dash, number, dash, number. So we do a similar type of thing in here. We check for the absence of anything in there. And if we left it blank, phone field is required. Otherwise, again, we set up a regular expression pattern, all right? And then we test to make sure that whatever we put in there, all right, whatever string we put into that cell phone text box matches that pattern. If it doesn't, all right, we're going to give an IPF. And an IPF is invalid phone number format. All right. Otherwise, again, everything's cool. Okay. Now we come down to here and you'll notice this is a little bit different. Where I use the get element by ID, not the $ here, because remember, we're using jQuery. What this is checking right here in lines 113 to 118, all right? That's the reason that you joined. So if you look in here, that's here. And if they're both left blank, all right, if they're both left blank, I don't know, maybe it's not even working. I don't know, it should be working, but you should have an error. Now this, what I did here, even though this is mandatory, you'll notice that I just defaulted it to the first selection, which was female. Since I did default it here, and I did the same thing here, these, yes, they are required, but I don't have to check for anything. I could go in and say, are you sure you're a male, or are you sure you're a female, or are you sure you're in the right age bracket? But I didn't, because since we pre-populated these, all right, we don't have to check for a presence or absence. There must be one or the other. Now that I'm looking at this, let's go back and look at our code. And this says, if that's empty and that's empty, all right, well, what I did was I just said check the first one, all right, and don't have any error in there. So we would just default it to the first one, all right. Now, again, I've mentioned this to you before, but I want to say it again. Right here, the only way that that comes out with an alert that says all checks passed, the only way that that works, all right, is if every field had something in it and what was put in every field rather was valid. So in other words, if I filled in all the fields, but I put hello in for the phone number, let's say, is valid is going to be false. All right. Then we've got a method in here that's going to clear everything that has to be cleared. So what are we clearing? We're clearing in here all of the text boxes. All right. Every text box in there is cleared. What are we doing here? Well, we're taking every field that is required and we're adding back the asterisk. All right. Then if you look in here, this is pre-populating. So this is setting the gender and it's setting the age. Now that I look at this, I don't know if that's correct. I'd have to go back and check that. All right. And how can I check that? I'll come back here. Okay, let's just fill in everything. Now it should come back. If I do this, everything passed. Okay, but all the stuff is still in here. So if I reset, notice what happened. It did work. Everything is reset to the default value. These are empty. This is select your state. These are empty. This is just placeholder text. All right, this was set to the first one. This was set to the first one. That was set to the first one. So again, if I try to submit again, I'm going to get all those errors that you saw to begin with. All right. And the reason I'm taking a little bit of time to go over this, I'm not trying to waste your time or waste my time. All right. But I do want to make sure that if you are asked to do this, if you are asked to write your own form, all right, and I would give you some, a minimal number of fields to put in it. And if you want to, you could, if you wanted to, put in more than that. all right? But there'll be at least a minimal number, and you'll have a submit and you'll have a reset. Now with your submit, all right, I'm going to have you go back to the days when we were working with the Halloween thing. And if you remember, for example, when you were supposed to put in the email, if everything was okay and you submitted, you brought up another HTML form. All right, and I'm going to ask you to do something like that. Don't worry about it. If that confuses you, it'll all be explained to you next week when you get the test. All right. And what are we doing right here? Well, we're doing the equivalent, all right, in here of adding an event listener, all right, but in jQuery. So everything that's in there should make sense to everybody watching this. All right. Now, the Calc BMI, again, this one was written using jQuery. All right. So it'll pretty much look the same from what we did before. You'll notice again, it has timeouts in it. All right. And again, we're using next text as opposed to next and working with the adjacent siblings, etc. But again, all that stuff is in there. One thing I wanted to mention to you, all right, because I haven't done a really great job of this, and that is what we're going to be looking at fairly soon. All right, what we're going to be looking at is we're going to come in and we're going to talk about some of the things in JavaScript that are a little bit more advanced features. That's what's at the end of the book. Will you have to put those advanced features into your last assignment? A couple of them, but most of the ones that I'll ask you to put in, we've already looked at. Now, one thing that's interesting in here, notice that the status and the result are both grayed out. And if we come down here, it says status equal result. Probably should have called that one the status. It still works, but notice it's underlined everything in here. All right. And what it's saying is status used to be a reserved word here in JavaScript, but it's not anymore. All right. So really notice if I come back and, for example, change this to the status like that all that error would go away. So I can come in here and just find every place. I'm not going to do that now because I'd rather do it as a global search and replace, but it would be much cleaner. This just looks bad, and you might find that confusing. And again, when you look in here, what do we have? Well, here again is the equivalent. It says that when we click the calculate button, we pass the event in because we want to make sure we're preventing the default on the calculate. Why? Because this may not work. All right. We've got our clear all in here. So you should by now be able to look at this. The program that you do next week won't be BMI. I'm just telling you that right now. There'll be nothing in there with BMI. But you are going to be asked to probably create about 4 pages. All right. And on at least 2 of those pages, one will be a contact page, similar to what we just looked at. And one will be a page where you're not going to be playing a game. It's not, well, you are going to, it's kind of a game, but you're not going to be doing the guessing game thing. All right. So you don't have to worry about that. All right. Let's take a look at what else is in here. All right. Here's the FAQ page. And again, hopefully one of the things that you see with that, man, that's pretty doggone small. Yeah. All right. This is the FAQ. We're telling it to target here every single H2 that's in there. What is that? Well, let me go back to here and let's look at FAQ.html. All right. And if we look at that, what you'll notice in here is it's set up in a way that is similar to the way they set it up in the book. All right. What do I mean? What is BMI? This is, and I guess all that I could have probably lined it up a little better, but this is the first thing that's in there on that accordion. All right. Then this is the answer to that thing on the accordion. So we've got an H2 and then we've got a div. Sometimes the div will have a paragraph in it, like these two. But if you notice, there's another paragraph. All right, there's another paragraph. And it looks like they all may have been paragraphs, except when you get down to the last one. What are the BMI classifications? Okay, then we've got an unordered list. And I'm sorry that it formats it this goofy way. I don't know why it does. It's because one of the things I've got loaded on here is prettier. All right. But again, if we take a look at this one, and I know you've seen it already, but what you'll notice is when we do, make this smaller. All right. All of these paragraph, 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 paragraph. So you can see all of them. But the classifications, okay, again, that is an unordered list. Could have been done as 4 paragraphs, could have been done as 1 paragraph where we just had 4 line breaks or 3 line breaks. So there's a lot of different ways that this stuff can be done. All right, will you be doing something similar to this? Yes. All right, there will be the equivalent on the test that you take of an FAQ page. When you do that one, I'm not going to care. You can, if it's easier for you, you can do that as a jQuery page. If you'd rather, you can do that as a vanilla JavaScript page. Again, all this stuff will be spelled out. I'm in the middle right now of actually writing the requirements for this. All right. But again, when we go back to this, where hopefully one of the things that I'm not going to say you're impressed with, but that you look in here, wow, there's really not a whole heck of a lot. Also, if you notice in here on line 6, I used a slide toggle. Did you have to do that? No. But what it did was it slid down the answer over 1 second as you did this. So it used one of the special jQuery effects. We could have used any of those that you saw in the jQuery UI. Some of them wouldn't have made a lot of sense, like explode, but we could have used anything in there. All right. And again, remember that when you're talking about jQuery, it's, basically it's write once, use many times, and it's the idea is to use as little bit of code as typically as possible. All right. So let's take a look then also in here, and we're going to look at the swap. All right. So we've got in here BMI, contact, etc., index, and I think it might be the about. Yeah, that's the before and afters. All right. I don't know how some of this stuff got in here. It's just dumb, but it did. All right. So if we look at this, this is got those pictures on the top, and it allows you to go back and forth between them. There will be something in here. I don't know what yet, but there will be something when you are asked to do one of these things where you'll have to preload some images. I don't know what it'll be. All right. What I did, just so you know, when I taught this class last, which was, I don't even remember if it was, I think it was last spring, to be honest with you. But when I taught this class last, there was no mandate at the time that said, when you make tests up, you must do this, you must do this, you must use this test. So I made up my own. All right. And that's what students did. Well, the mandate has come down now that the tests that are given at St. Louis and the tests that are given at here online should be the same. So I'm writing this test up this weekend. I'm going to send it out to Doug Gegelman, who's my counterpart at St. Louis, and I'm going to tell him I'm going to give this as a final for JavaScript, and hopefully he'll have no problems with it. All right. Okay. So again, this is the image swap that's in here. And as you can see, I put in comments, preload the images, set up the event handlers, actually do the swapping. All right. Cancel the default action and then make it back. This is almost taken directly out of the book. All right. One of the things I'll have to think about this weekend is how to incorporate something like this into what I want you to do. All right. So again, you can see exactly what is happening here. And I think I told you this already. I ripped these all off from the internet. All right. But it is at least fairly responsive in here. It doesn't look terrible. All right. And so let's see. We have now talked about the contact, the BMI a little bit, the FAQ, the about is what we just mentioned here, and the homepage. And really with a homepage, there's not a whole heck of a lot in here. You will notice also, if you take a look in here, close all these. If I come down and bring up the CSS file, it's not small. All right. There are media queries in here. Again, this is by no means perfect, but there's, I think it was like 400 some lines, 450 lines. All right. Will I expect you to write that much? No, but you are going to be expected to do your share of CSS. And the way I'm planning on grading this, I'm looking at 250 points. I'm not sure if I'm going to use that as a number or not. All right. But if I do, there's a very good chance that it'll be about 60 points for the HTML, about 60 points for the CSS, and about 125 or 130 points for the JavaScript. That's the way I'm looking at it right now. And we'll see. We'll see how it works. What I will show you next week is how I did it. Now, with that said, and I'll say this again next week, I do not want anybody copying and redoing what I did. Some of you did that, like for your Flexbox assignment, or I'm sorry, your Bootstrap test. Some people went back and they grabbed the Flexbox thing that I did and redid it in Bootstrap. That's not what you were supposed to do. You were supposed to do brand new applications, a brand new one-page Bootstrap and a brand new three-page Bootstrap. All right. But next week, I'll show you how I did it and I'll run through it. All right. So you have some kind of an idea of what it is I'll be looking for. All right. That's what I wanted to say about this. So with that said, I'm going to jump into the book here. All right. So let me close this and this. And I think I got it open in a couple more places too. So this, and let's go to right here. Now, when you look right here, we're here now. We've done 1 through 7. We've done 8 through 11. I think I mentioned this to you earlier. You did not get a test on jQuery. All right. The reason I went over jQuery is if you decide, and you'll know this when you get the test, but for example, like on an image swap page, if you want to do it using jQuery, you can. If you want to add some special effects and or some animations, you can. Anything you do with jQuery, you can do with regular vanilla JavaScript. jQuery is JavaScript. We've talked about this before. All right. Okay. So now we're going to jump into chapter 12. And as you can see, there's 3 big topics here in chapter 12. Working with numbers, working with strings, and working with dates. And if you watched as I was getting ready this morning, one of the things I did right before class was I went out to W3 schools and I took a look at their number methods, right? Now we've used, or we've looked at, or kind of looked at, toString. And what string does is it converts whatever you have into a string. So in other words, and it doesn't look like much, but if I do this, so 755, I'm at Rankin right now. 755 is the address of the room that I'm in. If I put that into a JavaScript program like that, all right, it's the number 755. If I do this, The way it changes, it is now this. And you might say, well, that's the same thing. Not at all. This, before I put in the .to string, had an arithmetic value of 755. This has an arithmetic value of 0. It is the string 555. So everything that we've been putting in this semester, every time you put something into a text box, for example, it goes in as a string. That's why we've used parse int and parse float and some of the other stuff that we've worked with. All right. So they've got some of the stuff in here. Now, what do you have to be aware of, for lack of better words? Well, most of it is the stuff we've already worked with. In other words, the to fixed one. All right. Because it's nice if you're going to be doing something that's going to be working with dollars and cents or even our BMI, etc., that you don't have it off to a lot of different number of decimal places. All right. But most of the other stuff in here, we probably aren't even going to use. All right. There's examples of each one of them in here. All right. And I'm not going to go over any of them. They also go over in here again. All right. Parse float and the parse int, which we've talked about before. All right. Now you'll notice, as it says, there is a number method. ToString takes something, whatever you input, and it converts it into a string. Number does the opposite. All right. So if we look at these examples that are right here, all right, you'll notice that, for instance, a Boolean variable of true does have a numeric value of 1, and a Boolean value of false has a numeric value of 0. Then you'll notice when you look at all these other ones, as long as what you put in there is a number, all right, as long as what you put in there is a valid number, and that's all of these, it works. Then notice in here, this wasn't a valid number because of the comma. This isn't a valid number because you've got an embedded string within the string, not before it, not after it. And of course, this is a string already, so it doesn't work. So as you can see, when you run that number method, it's either going to return the numeric coefficient of whatever you inputted, or it's going to return NaN, meaning not a number. All right. Okay. If we do keep looking in here again, I move back up, and someplace in here, there we go. They've got, even number properties in here. Do you have to worry about those? Not really, but again, if you needed more on NaN, this is where you'd go. All right. Notice that there's a max value and there's a min value. Those numbers are so big, they're so highly astronomical that unless you were doing something in the scientific realm where you needed either a really big number or a really small number, they wouldn't make a lot of sense. And you'll notice they even have got a safe integer in here. Now, one of the things, and I mentioned this to you previously, that unlike next semester, if you're going to be in the C# class, C# can't handle infinity. If you try to divide by 0, the program blows up and you get what's called a mathematical exception. All right. But as best it can, all right, as best it can here, it tries to, for lack of better words, it tries to go and figure out infinity for you. All right. Okay. Next, here's a bunch of the string methods. Why am I taking the time to mention this to you? Because chapter 12 is on number methods, string methods, and as we'll look at in a minute, date methods. Now, when you look at these, some of these should make sense to you. What do I mean? Well, we talked a little bit about string length. So if I set up a variable, if I said let greeting equal double quote hello double quote, then if I did the length of greeting, it would come back as 5, HELLO. All right. Many of the things that are in here, like things like slice, substring, str, they're going to end up working with part of a string. All right. Typically, as it says, they're known as a substring. So what a lot of the work that you could conceivably do as a programmer would be to go through textual type of documents looking for matches, maybe someone's name, maybe an amount, maybe something else. All right. Now the replace and the replace all right, if you've ever done any work with like Microsoft Word or anything like that, you know what those are like. It's like it's the exact same thing as if you go in some kind of a like I said, a Word or some kind of of software like that, and you do a replace or replace all. We've used the two uppercase and the two lowercase. Actually, we've used the two upper, but two lower is just the opposite. If I want to be able to concatenate two things together, there's two ways of doing it in JavaScript. You can use concat, or you can use the plus sign. All right, either one will work. The trim I had some problems with the other day. And actually, when you look at the trim that's there, it's got trim, trim start, and trim end. And really what trim is trim calls trim start, then trim calls trim end, which says get rid of all leading blank spaces, then get rid of all blank, or ending rather, blank spaces. Then we've got a pad start and a pad end. All right. And if you've ever gotten anything like this, I don't think they do it as much anymore, but it used to be something like if you were to go and you were to get, let's say that you were to get a check and it was for $1.95, you might have gotten something that looked like this. All right. And what they've done right there is they have padded this field with asterisks. All right. And you can pad from the beginning or you can pad from the end. You can even pad with blanks if that's what you want to do. The charat we've looked at, all right, and I've used that one several times, charat 0 to grab the first character to make sure that what we put in was a yes or a no. The char codat is going to give you basically the numeric code that's associated with that character. Typically, it's not something you have to worry about. Split is interesting. If I do this, so if I come through and type in something like this, and it's going to run off because I've got the font real big, but all right, if I do this and I run split on that, all right, what's going to happen is it's going to create an array. And basically in the equivalent of greeting 0, greeting 0, that's going to be equal to hi. All right, and greeting 1 is going to be equal to there with a period. So what it's going to do is it's going to take the string and it's going to convert it into an array. And you have to tell it where to split when you split it. And I'd split it here on the blank spaces. All right, so that would be 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Now, when you look at that and make, okay, fine, I even kind of get that, but why would you ever want to do this? Well, you cannot run you can't run array functions on a string. But if I take a string and I convert it into an array, then I can go and run different array functions on it. We'll talk about array functions next week. All right. In some languages, rather than being called split, this is called explode, because you're taking one thing and boom, you're exploding it and turning it into a bunch of other things. Now, I'm not going to go through these, but you'll notice there's examples of each one of these in here. All right. Now, are you going to need to do a lot of work with this on your test? The answer is no. So fine, then why are you showing it to us? Because as you move on in your career here at Rankin, and you all eventually take, for example, the AWD 1111 class, which most people take in the third semester, all right? But that is the database-driven web development 1 class, and you do work with JavaScript on the server. In there, you do use some of these methods. All right, and that's why they're being introduced to you right now. All right, and finally, the date methods. All right, and again, most of the ones that are in here probably make sense to you. All right, you'll notice that every one of these, this is not a complete list in here. Every one of these, as you can see by the heading, they're get methods. So all of them must appear on the right-hand side of an equal sign, and they are all set up. They're all set up so you can grab a value and basically copy it over into a JavaScript variable. And if we went in here and looked at the examples, that's what you'd see. All right. Now here, you said, well, we're not doing it here. Well, yeah, but we kind of are. We're just grabbing it. So again, when you look right here, okay, there's the date. If I put in today's date, all right, and I go 2023, 11, what is it, 7, and I run this, you can see how it changes. All right, now I don't know if we do this, I'm wondering if we do it like that. All right, I think that's going to work as well because that's going to create a new date object. All right, so that date got get full year. Let's just quickly do this. Put it back to what it was and run it. So it goes back to 2021. Then I'm going to get rid of everything that's in here and run it again and see if it puts in 2023. And it does. All right. So we can grab any of those things that are in there. All right. Any of the things that you just saw. Dates can be a very important thing because a lot of times you want to do a lot of work with this. If you work for a company, you might have to, for example, write a program where that if there is an invoice that goes out on a certain date and payment is always due within either 30 or 60 or 90 days, boom, you figure that out. There is a little bit of date math that you can even do, but it's very limited. So these are getters. All right. And you'll notice that what comes next are setters. All right. So it's pretty much not everything you saw before, but most of the stuff. Now, that doesn't mean when you look in here, all right, that it's going to appear on the left-hand side of an equal sign, because with most of this stuff, all right, you won't use an equal sign in there. But as you can see, all right, and there are things that are built in here, such as, all right, setting the month. Notice it looks a little weird. All right. So if I asked for the month right now, it would give me 10. It would not give me 11. All right, because everything starts with a 0. We're going to talk about how you can counter that when we talk about arrays next week. All right. And the last two things I'll mention because they're in the book. So again, this is the math object. This is the kind of math stuff that you can work with. Which ones of these are you typically going to have to care about? If, a lot of books show stuff where you work with the diameter of a circle or the area of a triangle, etc. There you might use math.py. All right. But with most of the stuff that's in here, you probably won't use it very much. The interesting thing, though, about math, all right, and I'm going to say this to you, you don't have to write it down. You don't have to worry about it. No, it won't be on any test. But when you work with math, the math class is what's called in programming, including JavaScript, it's a static class, which means that you can use math without having to create a math object. later next week or sometime next week, we're going to go over chapter, I think it's 16, and we're going to talk about objects. And I will tell you, for lack of better words, probably most of you are going to be confused and are going to be like, I don't get this. I don't see why we'll use this. And again, the reason I'm going to show it to you is you will end up using classes, methods, properties, etc. a lot in both the AWD1111, AWD1115, and we're even introduced to them towards the end of the C# class. All right. So I wanted to mention that stuff first before we actually go into here, chapter 12, which is what we're going to do. All right. Now, before we do this, it looks like it is right now, it is 9:01. So let's please come back at 9:15 and we'll go over this chapter and we'll see where we are time-wise at that time. So I'll see you at 9:15. All right, it's 9:15, so I'm going to continue on. And as you can see, if you look on the screen right now, we have an here to go through for the rest of the book. All right, I'm going to go through the first one right now. We'll see where we are time-wise. But by the end of next week, we will be done with this book. I'm just telling you right now. All right. And the way that I'm going to do this, I think I mentioned this to you before, but we'll see how long each period takes. In other words, if I can lecture, let's say tomorrow, I can lecture on one of the chapters in an hour, then we'll go do 2 chapters that day. I won't do any more than 2. That's just too much to expect for people to understand. But by next week, again, I will hand out the final test to you. All right. And you will have the week of Thanksgiving, the Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday will all be labs to work on that. So you'll get a minimum of 3 whole class periods to work on that, and probably more than that. All right. And then when we come back, we're going to actually do 2 things. I mentioned to you we are going to talk about React, and yes, we are. But before we do that, I'm going to show you kind of some stuff that you can do with JavaScript that you probably didn't even realize that you could do. We'll do a project or 2 as a class where we're going to use what are called APIs, or application program interfaces, to do a few things for us that are kind of neat. All right. So with that said, now we're going to go into the third of 4 sections of the book. So if we look in here, I'm not going to read a bit of this, but notice the title of it. All right, these are more advanced type of things. These are things that you're not really going to use much in this class, but you will use some, really most, almost all of the stuff that's in here, you will be using in one of your future classes. In addition, in chapter 13, they talk about control structures. Now, you've already learned some of the stuff that's in there, such as we have talked about switch statements. We have talked about if statements. We have talked about while loops, for loops, and do while loops. All right. But we'll revisit some of that stuff, but we'll also talk about what's called the ternary operator when we get there. And then we'll talk about exceptions, which are exceptions to the rule. Typically, when you get an exception in your program, the program ceases to run. And then we'll look at regular expressions in a little bit more depth and breadth of coverage as well. All right. So let's jump into this chapter. And as you can see, the chapter is how to work with numbers, strings, and dates. And I already gave you a lot of the stuff that's in here. All right. So we first talk about numbers, then they give you an application. Then we talk about strings, and we talk about dates and times, and we have another application. And then we look at internationalization, which is a fairly big topic, but we'll talk about it in just a bit. All right. Now you'll notice in this application, the application they have in there is something called PIG. All right. And it's, we'll go over it, but just so you see it, I've already got it up on the screen here. You have 2 people play. So I've got Bob and Mary. All right. And the idea with Bob and Mary is you try to get to 50. You shake the die. When you click roll, it's going to give you a number between 1 and 6. So let's say I shake it. So I'm Bob here. And no, it looks like I'm Mary. So it should be a new game. So Bob's turn. So I roll. All right. I got a 4. I can keep rolling, and I want to get 50 total. But if I get a 1, all right, when I get a 1, it goes back to 0 again. So if I go again, all right, notice it went back to 0 because I rolled a 1, and now it's Mary's turn. So they program that. Okay, we'll talk about that in just a bit. And then they have a countdown calculator. And as you can see, I've already done it. And I put in, Christmas, and I put in the Christmas day, and there's 48 days. If I change that to Thanksgiving, which is, I think, like 11/23, I believe. All right. So you can see there's only 16 days. Well, we just had Halloween. Now I could put in here, I think it'll take this. 1031, but I think it'll give me a negative number, but I don't remember with this program if it does that or not. It happened 7 days ago. Now, if I check to see how many it is until next Halloween, we get that too. All right, okay. So again, we'll probably go through this chapter fairly quickly. All right. Now they do mention in here, they talk about stuff being static. I started to mention this before the break, but I do want you to understand this, that in JavaScript, like in most other programming languages, math is handled internally by what's called the math class. All right. You may have even noticed that a little earlier when I brought up the W3 schools page on math. I'm not going to bring it up again. All right. But the math class is what's called a static class. What that means is I can say math dot something. I don't have to create what are called math objects. I can just use the class. Now, if that makes no sense to you, that's kind of to be expected, but that's what we're going to talk about next week when we talk about objects. And we'll write a couple programs, or I will, if you want to write them, or you can watch, look along, look as I'm doing them. So there's a bunch of constants that are in here. I'm not going to read any of them to you. All right. But, again, you'll notice, curiously, each language has a maximum value. Java's is 1,798 followed by 305 zeros. All right. Again, there probably would be, for 99.999% of us, we'd never have to use these things that are in here. All right. But you can go in and test for all this, and they mention it. I said this to you before. All right. When you try to divide by 0 in other languages, such as next semester, we'll do that right near the beginning of the semester in the C# class, we'll do something like this. There won't be an alert, it'll be something else, but we'll do 10 divided by 0. And you'll get what's called a divide by 0 exception, which means the program will break unless you handle it yourself, but by default, it'll break, it'll stop running right there. An exception is an exception to the rule. It's something you don't want to have happen. On the other hand, JavaScript is one of the few languages that when you do that, you get this. All right, and notice you can get negative infinity, but if the only one that doesn't work divided by 0 is 0 divided by 0, because as it says there, it displays NaN. All right, there's a whole big thing we could go through that we talk about in the AWD1111 class about this stuff. They actually have something in JavaScript called truthy and falsy. All right, I don't want to get into it right now, but we do talk about it in a later class. All right, and again, you can read the stuff that's in here. The big takeaway in here is by now, everyone should understand NaN, not a number. You should all understand how to test for NaN with the isNaN method. We've done that kind of stuff for quite a while now. All right, as far as the methods then of the number object, again, we talked about these. I showed them to you before we got into the chapter. You know what toFixed is. ToString is kind of the opposite well, actually it's the opposite of number, but ToString returns a string, as it says, with a number in the given base. So you can do that. What does that even mean? Well, when you work with computers, you don't always work with base 10 or decimal. Sometimes you work with base 16, which is called hexadecimal. Sometimes you work with base 8, which is called octal. All right. Now, back in my day, and this is how long ago this was, when you had error messages, so when I was a full-time programmer and I had error messages, it would print everything out, and it would print out tons of stuff in this base 8. And you had to go and manually convert things from base 8 to base 10. Then you had to convert them from that number to what the equivalent string was. It was a pain in the butt. Much easier to do it right now. All right. You'll notice when we work with numbers, Notice there's an is, NaN, and the other stuff that's in there. I always found this interesting that you can say is integer. All right. And the reason I think that that's interesting, and you've also got parse int, you know that, but technically Java looks at every number as being a number. In other words, JavaScript, I should say, not Java. JavaScript does not, all right, basically does not differentiate between integers and floats unless you do the is integer like they have here, or you do a parse int or a parse float. Now, I probably have never mentioned this to you, but if I were to do this, I just wanted to show you this. If I came in here and said, let age equal 0. And then later on in my program, I said age equal parse int. Let me make this smaller. So we come in here and we say age equal parse int prompt. What is your age? All right. And if we did that and you run the program, it's going to come up with a message on screen. And that message on screen is going to say, what is your age? All right. And it's, whoops, and it's going to stop right there. Now, what you may know, so let's say that I'm 35. That's fine. It'll take 35 and it'll put it into age. If I do this, it's going to break because it's expecting an integer, but I'm giving it a float or a double. All right, whatever you want to call it. If I do this, it's going to break. But if I do this, so let's say I'm 35 and a half, that will actually succeed. Because what it does when it reads this is it says, there's a number, oh, that's not a number, so stop. All right. And I believe if I were to do this as a parse float, and I said something like, what is your salary? All right, and it came up and it said, what is your salary? All right, and I put in here, let's say $50,012.34. But then I did this, 0.5678. I think that would succeed as well. This is all valid, but as soon as it sees a second decimal point, it'll just throw that away. So it'll handle it like that. Now you might say, well, why is this even a big deal? Because there are some smarts built into this language that are not built into other languages. In most other programming languages, if you put in a second decimal point, the program will blow up because it doesn't know how to handle it. All right. Or if you're saying you want a whole number and you put a decimal point in there, it'll blow up. So JavaScript is a little bit unique like that. It's not the only language, but most languages do not allow you to do that. All right. So as far as what's in here, okay, let's look at these. What would you use? I already mentioned pi. You know, again, if you were going to be doing something with geometric shapes or whatever, you might use that. All right. Now, most people on this actually know what this means and think that they don't, but the absolute value. If I say to you, how old are you? And you say 21, and you say, how old are you? They say that to me, and I say 60. Okay. Well, 60 and 21, there's 39 years between us. And it doesn't matter whether you say 60 minus 21 or 21 minus 60. There's still 39 years between us. So when the sign doesn't matter, you can use the absolute value function, which says if there is a negative sign, it throws it away. Rounding does just that. All right. When you round, you typically round up or you round down. Now it says here to the closest integer. All right. But there are ways that you can round to the nearest decimal as well. The ceiling and floor are big when you're working, especially with negative numbers. So if I've got the number negative 8.7, and I use ceiling, it's going to give me the next highest number. And really, it's not -9, it's -8, because -8 is more than -9. And floor does just the opposite. Truncating, as it says, does no rounding. The POW I've shown you already, where basically it allows you to do squaring, cubing, etc., that kind of thing. Square root, hopefully that just makes sense. Math.min and math.max are interesting, all right? And they have a lot of ramifications that they don't show in this example here, because with math.min, you can give it a group of numbers and it'll give you the smallest one in the group. Math.max, it'll give you the largest one. So we'll talk about that one a little bit later as well. And there's examples on all of these here. All right, the random number, we've looked at this already. We did this in the guessing game. I mentioned this to you when we started it, and as they show in that chart there, in any programming language that allows for random numbers, you are actually given a decimal number that is between 0, greater than or equal to 0, but less than 1. All right, we could have done this in our guessing game, just math.random, but it would have given us a decimal value. So that's why typically you come in and you do something. All right, so here's a get random number function. Notice returns an integer that ranges from 1 to 100. So we could have done it like that. So you might say, well, geez, why didn't we do it like that? That's easier than what we did. Not every programming language has a get random number that works like that one does. What I showed you will work in virtually any programming language that allows you to work with random numbers. All right, so again, this is the pig application. So when we look at it, that's what it looks like. That's what I showed you before. So you've got on the top, you've got what? I mean, this would be probably an H1 right here, and you've got a box around everything. Then you've got another box around here and an unordered list, it looks like, with all the rules. All right, then you've got a label and a text box, a label and a text box, a label and another text box which has been disabled, a label and another text box which has been disabled, and a button for the new game. A button, all right, a box here, which is basically, again, going to be disabled, and one here, which is going to be disabled. So you could build this interface. I really have no doubt that any of you could build this interface rather without a lot of problems. All right. Probably the hardest thing to do, though, it would not be the HTML, which is shown right here. Notice nothing's in the mustard color because it's all stuff we get. The JavaScript, well, notice what they're doing here. Winning total, they're making 50 and getting a random number. Well, what that is doing is that is simulating you going in and rolling a die. All right. And it's returning a number between 1 and 6. Then you have to go in and also come in here and see. Remember, there's two ways that if you've got two people playing, there's two ways that you go from player 1 to player 2, or from player 2 to player 1. And that's if either the person rolling the die, so to speak, gets a 1, which means their play stops, or they click the button that says hold. When they click the button that says hold, you've got to take whatever they've gotten in this turn and add it to their previous value. But you also have to check it to see if now the number they have is greater than or equal to 50, because if it's 50 or above, the game's over and they won. And that's all the logic that's in here. All right. Now, the only thing I would probably change, to be honest with you, if I was writing this game, there's absolutely nothing wrong with it. But someplace in here, in fact, I think it was on the previous page. Let's see. I would not have made the winning total 50. I would have probably made it 20 or 25 or something like that, because, I don't know if you ever played this, but there was a card game that we played as kids that you called War. All right. And you basically each flipped a card, and whoever had the greatest number they got to keep both cards. But if they matched, you had to draw two more cards, and that was the war. Well, the point is, I'd play that with my younger brother when we were kids. Sometimes we'd play the same game for hours. If you had this set at 50, it's totally a game of luck and chance. All right. You could play for hours without having a winner. So I'd probably make it a smaller number. All right. But that's just me. All right. All right. So then we jump over into strings. So I'm not going to say any more about that particular example. So as they mentioned in chapter 2, we learn how to create and work with simple strings. Remember, with strings, the key thing that differentiates JavaScript from most other programming languages is you can have a string in either double quotes or single quotes. Just to show you, because I'm just trying to be, show you a couple things as we're going through here. So you already know this. We can come in here and say, like, let name equal, let's say F name for first name. So let F name equal Jeff. Let L name equal Scott. And the way that this works in JavaScript is that's totally legal. So I can use single quotes for one and double quotes for the other. You know that. On the other hand, now next semester, all right, for those of you who'll be in the C# class, if I have to say string F name equals Jeff, but if I come in and try to do this, string L name equal Scott, I'm going to get an error. Because, for example, in C#, you can only use double quotes for strings. You can't use single quotes. All right. Actually, a single quote like this is for a single character. So I could do char. For example, here I could put middle initial. And I could say in here P, which is my middle initial. That would work. All right. But you can't use both double and single quotes in most other languages. There are exceptions. All right. So how to use properties and methods of the string object. And again, many of these we've already looked at, either previously in earlier classes or today. All right. So length, I've already mentioned to you. All right. Some of the methods, we looked at all of these already. Okay. And there are plenty of examples in the chapter here, so I'm not really going to talk much about them, other than, again, to repeat to you that these substring things that are in here especially, they become important when you're writing programs and you've got to dig through a document or something else looking for something. I gave an example of this earlier in the semester. In the politically correct age in which we live, maybe somebody would decide that they wanted to go through the entire Constitution, and everywhere it said men, they wanted to replace it with they or with them or something like that. We could do that. All right. Some additional things that ends here. Now, these aren't ones most of them we talked about, but the starts with and ends with, I would think at least, all right, they make some sense to you. All right, either it's something starts with a letter or whatever, or it ends with it, or it doesn't. All right, includes, as it says, does the string contain a specified string? This is another way, all right, that you can work with this stuff. And I mentioned the trim stuff and I mentioned the pad stuff to you already. Repeat is kind of nice. So if I literally wanted to go in there and write about 50 asterisks, I could sit there and, hit asterisk, 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 asterisk 50 times, or I could come in and use repeat. All right. How to create an array from a string. We looked at this before by using the split. All right. And again, they have an example with it. It's not a terrific example. It's not a bad example. All right. They also talk, as it says in here, how to split a string into an array of characters. And you'll notice they've got a string here that's Grace Hopper, Grace M. Hopper. and they split it. In this case, they split it. And if you look at the split character, there isn't one. It's the empty string. So you split it every single time. So if you had Grace M. Hopper, like they show right here, something like this, it would be the G, then the R, then the A, etc. There, believe it or not, there are a lot of places where you can use this. So as it says, split breaks the string into substrings and returns those as basically the elements of an array. All right. And the last thing that's discussed in this section then are dates and times. Okay. And again, we've already talked a little bit about this. Okay. Now notice this is the example that I showed you earlier, this one, equal new date. So what that's saying here, and I'm not expecting this to make a lot of sense, but I want you to hear it. In these examples that you see here, that all say something, const something equals new date, all right? What we're doing is we're creating what's referred to as a date object, all right? And date objects, by default, are going to have a month, a day, a year, an hour, what is it? An hour, a minute, a second, and a millisecond. It's going to have all that stuff, whether you provide it or not. So if I do this right now, all right, right there, it's going to come back and it's going to hold 11 for the month, 7 for the day, 2023 for the year, 9 for the hour, 41 for the minute, you know, whatever the seconds are in here. So 51 for the seconds and a certain number of milliseconds. All right. But there's other ways that you can do it as well. You can set up your own date. All right. So if I wanted to set up Christmas, for example, and say const Christmas, I could even call it Christmas 2023 equal new date. And then here I could put in 12/25/2023, for example. All right. Now, when you work with this stuff, again, it's important to realize, and I said that to you before, it's going to come back and say 10 is November. All right, because January is considered 0. All right. Usually, believe it or not, that's not that big a thing. And the reason it's not is when you return this, rather than returning something like this, you can return it, but you can add 1 to the month. All right, that's not going to change it. All right, it'll still be considered a 1 in this case right here. But once you add 1 to it, what you'll return is a 2. All right, and again, if that doesn't make sense, you're going to see all this stuff in action. So again, when we are doing this in saying new date, we are doing what's called instantiating or creating a date object. Here, we're doing this and we're calling it leap date. All right. And that would be invalid because 2021 was not a leap year. I believe next year, 2024, will be a leap year. All right. Now, just a little bit of history that you probably don't care about, but as they say in here, in JavaScript, dates are represented by the number of milliseconds. Remember, 1,000 milliseconds equal 1 second. Since midnight, January 1st, 1970. That actually has some significance in computer terminology. It's called the epoch date, EPOCH. All right. When you create a date object, the date and the times, I don't know if you can see that on my screen, but in the bottom right-hand corner, it grabs the date and the time from my machine. So it's the local date and time. All right. Let's see, month numbers again start with 0. We already talked about that. And you can use what's called the instance of operator to see if something really and truly is a date. All right. Some of the methods in here, most of these are going to be the getters and the setters that we already talked about. All right. But the one that you may end up using, again, not in here, but you will use, for example, next semester in the C# class, is the toDate string. And there's different ways that you can format a date. All right, I mean, do you want it in there as the word November with a space, the number 7 with a comma, the number 2023, or do you want it in there as 11-7-2023 or 11/7, etc. There's all sorts of ways that you can take both the date and the time and change the way they look. The gets we already talked about with the date object. The sets we already talked about with the date object. I wanted to show you those, and I wanted to show you them in the W3 school site, because if we had a question or if you ever wanted to look at them, you had a resource that you could go to. All right. So again, they come in here and talk about how you can display dates. Notice here the get month +1, kind of what I mentioned to you before. All right, if you want to make sure that you are displaying something in the way that you want it to be. If you said to somebody that it was month 0 and they weren't a computer person, they could very easily get confused over what you were trying to show them. All right, this is like another countdown type of thing in here. All right, where they're saying calculate the days until New Year's, and there's some more examples in here as well. Now, when you work with dates, okay, JavaScript, like most other programming languages, has smarts built into it. What I mean by that is that JavaScript, even though the months are 0 to 11, it won't let you put in 33 for a month, for example. Okay, you'll get an error if you try to do that. And when you are working with a non-leap year, 28 is the maximum number of days in February. When you're working with a leap year, 29 is the maximum days in February. Otherwise, it's 30 or 31, as you know, depending on the month. All right, so here's the countdown application. All right, and as it says, it accepts an event name and a date, and it calculates the number of days between the current day, all right, and whatever it is you're looking for. So we'll skip the HTML and we'll take a quick look at the JavaScript in here. All right. Notice that they still started with a use strict and that they're using jQuery. All right. So they're getting the name of the event, they're getting the date for the event, and they're getting whatever that label will say as far as how many days are until then. So they've done a good job here of putting in some documentation. Make sure the user enters an event name and a date. They're using the string length in there. All right, they could have used the trim, but they didn't. Okay. And if either one of them is left empty, you're just going to get a generic message. All right. Then make sure the string has 2 slashes in it. So again, they're doing a split on that. And they're saying that we should have now 3 parts in our date: the month, the day, and the year. And if you don't, again, we'll put them into this format. We'll also check make sure the year has got 4 digits in it. Not that big a thing now, but it was a much bigger thing when we got to the year 2000, 23 years ago. And when you put in a number, were you talking about 19, something or 20 something? All right. As it says, convert the event date string to a date object and then check to make sure what you put in is valid. So again, make sure that you put in a month and a day and a year that are valid. All right. And this is just some stuff for capitalizing words. Okay. So when you look in here, this is where, calculate the days. So what are they doing in here? 24 hours in a day, 60 minutes in an hour, 60 seconds in a minute. All right, type of thing. That's basically what it'll get to in the calculation. And you'll notice that in here, also when I put the Halloween in, how it said happened 7 days ago. So if you put in a date in the past, if you want to make yourself feel bad, you can put in your birth date there. All right. If I did mine, it would be really big. All right. And finally, the last thing that's discussed in this chapter, as you can see right here, is internationalization. And you may or may not be aware of this, but different countries represent dates in different ways. For instance, here we typically say month, month/day, day/year. In some other countries, they say day/month, month/year. All right. And it used to be that pretty much the universal date separator was a period, not a slash or a dash like we use. All right. So they talk about formatting numbers and formatting dates. All right. And you'll notice that when you do that, this is quite often what you're going to use. All right. So you want the English. There's I think there's ESP for Spain is España, etc. And there's other ones here as well. All right. Again, why would that be important? Because we want to make sure that if you notice in the second example here, we're using US dollars for American currency, but Great Britain pounds for British currency and whatever the thing would be for Europe. All right. So internationalization is important. I mean, many companies have got an international footprint, and you've got to make sure that your payment, etc., the stuff is all set up correctly for the particular nation, country, whatever it is you're dealing with. All right, and you'll notice, as it says, there is an internationalization API spec that allows you to work with this stuff. So that's it for this chapter. All right, not taking as long as I thought. So I'm going to right away jump into the next chapter. We'll finish this one, not before the break, but we'll get part of the way through, take a break, and then finish this. Probably be done sometime 10:30, quarter to 11, sometime in there, I would guess. All right. Now this chapter 13, which starts on page 395, how to work with control structures, exceptions, and regular expressions. And again, much of the material with control structures we've already gone over. Not all of it, but most of it. All right. Some of the stuff in here on exceptions we have talked about, but we've never really done a try catch or looked at these. Some of the regular expression stuff we've looked at. So you'll notice there is an invoice application in here and there is an account profile application in here, and we'll look at those. All right. Now, it says here equality and identity, and I believe I mentioned this at the beginning of the semester, but I'm going to say it again anyway. If I do this, let age equal 21, and then I say let age, we're going to call it age str for age string equal 21, and I could have used single or double quotes there. If I do this, if age equal age str, that will come back as true. It's not checking the types. It's just checking the values of each one. On the other hand, if I do this, that will come back as false, because that is also checks the identity, meaning it says, are these two the same type of variable? They are not. Here we don't care. Here we do care. That's why the recommendation is virtually 100% of the time when you are putting in an if statement or a while loop or whatever, that when you are making your checks, you use the triple equals and not the double equals. In much the same way, and I know you've seen this already. All right. There is this, and there is this. This is going to come back as false because, again, it just checks the values. This will come back as true because it checks both the value and the identity or the type that you're working with. And that's pretty much what they're saying in here. And I'll let you read that yourself about equality and identity. All right, break and continue. Yeah, we've used these, but let's talk about what they mean. All right, so let me move down in here a little bit. And you know this, if I come in here and do this, let size equal S for small. And then I've got some code, I don't care what it is. But I come in here and I say, oops, I say switch on size. All right. And then I come in here and I say case S, and I could use a single or double quote, it doesn't matter. And I'll say alert size small. Break. And let's just suppose we have 3 sizes. That's it. We're going to keep it simple. Small, medium, and large. All right, so we've got an M here. And we've got an L here. All right, and because we're good programmers, we also put in here a default, and we'll just have it say alert, size unknown. And break. Technically, we don't need this last break because we're at the bottom anyway. All right. Now, you probably already know this, but since right now this is set up and the size was set up as S in here, all right, this is going to give me an alert with size small. All right. But if I do this, which you should never do, now it does what's called a fall through. So it does this, but since there's no break, it goes down and it does this. Still no break, so it does this. Still no break, so it does this. And then it ends. So break gets you out of whatever control structure you happen to be in. All right. And break is used most often within either a switch statement like this, all right, or in some kind of a loop. All right. You literally want to break out of something. All right. So that's the way it's usually used. So again, if I'm doing this, and I know I've given you examples like this before, but I'm trying to be complete here. So I'm going to get rid of, I'll leave those there. That's not going to hurt anything. But if I say this, let LCV equal 1, let end val equal 10. By default, when I do this, while LCV less than or equal to end val, and I'll say in here, alert LCV. You should all know this by now, that if I do that, I'm going to get an alert, then it's going to say 1. As soon as I press enter, it's going to give me another alert that says 2, then another alert that says 3. All right, and it's going to keep doing that. All right, nothing new there. On the other hand, if I come in, so that's literally going to do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. All right. On the other hand, if I change this and I say if LCV equal 7, break all right, then that's going to give me 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It's going to break out of the loop at that time. Finally, if I do this and put continue here, all right, that's going to print out 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 8, 9, 10. So continue will skip the rest of this iteration right here, and it'll jump right back up to the top. Now that I look at this too, I'd have to make sure, okay, I'd probably use a for loop here because otherwise I have to do a plus plus in here. All right, and I actually could do it like this. I could make that a 0, and you can actually write code like this. That would work. That would add 1 to it and then check it. So that would work like that. All right. But again, that's using break and continue in the ways that they are most often utilized. There's the identity. So we've talked about that already. I'm not going to sit and read to you. All right. The switch, again, we've looked at the switch in a lot of detail. I think we have at least. It is possible to do this. Notice this. So if you get an A or you get a B, your scholarship was approved. If you get a D or an F, it was not. All right, so you can put multiple things in there. That's okay. The conditional operator, we may have looked at that already. We may not have. I don't remember. So to quickly show you that one, if I come through here and write in this, let num1 equal 7. Let num2 equal 12. All right. And I'm going to say here, let max. And I can say if num1 is greater than or equal to num2, max equal num1. Else max equal num2. Totally fine. Nothing wrong with writing it that way. But there is a shortcut where I can do this. I can say max equal, and I can say num1 greater than or equal to num2, question mark, num1, colon, num2. This is called the ternary operator because there are 1, 2, 3 operands in here. It's also called the question mark colon operator. What this says is do this. If this is true, do what comes after the question mark. If this is false, do what comes after the colon. All right. So is 7 greater than or equal to 12? No. So it skips this and it takes num2 and it assigns it to max. If that was 27 or 17 or whatever, now it is true. So it would take num1 and assign it to max. All right. So it can be a shortcut, not used a lot, but there's nothing wrong with it either. All right. How to use non-Boolean values in conditions. This is this thing. Literally, it's referred to in Java-ese as truthy or falsy. I didn't make that up. All right. Falsy is everything you see up on top. 0, the empty string, null, undefined, or an empty array. Those are considered false. Virtually anything else is considered true. All right. Now, when you do this, and we've talked about this before, if you say let val and you don't give it a value right there, then its value is automatically undefined. All right, that's undefined. If you come in and say let val equal null, It's not undefined, it's unknown. And they sound like they're the same thing. And for most purposes, they pretty much are the same thing. But there are two different ways that you can do things. All right. And again, you can take a read on that if you're interested. There's the truthy and there's the falsy. All right. For logical operators, we've talked about this before. Now, this should all be reviewed, but this is something everyone in here should understand. All right. We've talked about and, we've talked about or, we've talked about not. All right. And actually, if I've got a very complex JavaScript expression with one or more ands, plus one or more ors, plus one or more nots, you always do the nots first. You always do those first. Then you do the ands, then you do the ors. And if you think about it, it actually makes sense because this is only operating on one value. It's as restrictive as possible. Here, they both have to be true. Here, only one has to be true. So if you've got a bunch of ands, ors, and nots, that's the order in which they'll be done, unless you use parentheses. All right. And again, that's all stuff that we've looked at in earlier classes. They've got a bunch of examples here. Now, kind of interesting, and we don't use this, but it is used in other languages, says ES 2020, which is the JavaScript that came out 3 years ago, provides what's called a nullish operator that can be used in place of an or, and a chaining operator that can be used in place of an and. All right. So you can use double question mark or question marks and a question mark. And as it says, these are both supported by all major browsers, but I'm not going to recommend that you don't just pretend they don't exist, because the question mark and the double question mark means something else in other languages. Plus, we talked about this, that short circuit evaluation, which says if you're anding two things, again, should all be a repeat for you. But if I say if, in fact, let's do this. Let num1 equal 10, let num2 equal 12. And if I say if num1 greater than 20 and num2 greater than 10, as an example here, well, is num1 greater than 20? No. Since it's an and with a double ampersand, JavaScript, like most programming languages, short circuits, says I don't even have to test this one. They have to both be true, and this one's already false. Now, if this is an or, of course, and the first one is false, you have to test the second one. But if it's an or and the first one's true, you again, short circuiting takes over and you don't have to check the second one. If you want to make sure that that happens, you can use either a single ampersand or a single pipe sign, and that will check them both regardless. All right, so they've got this invoice application here, and let's start going over this. Maybe we'll have time, and then we'll take another break, and then we'll finish this up. All right, so as it says, it's a web application that calculates a discount amount total for an invoice. It uses some of the conditional expressions and selection structures, so it's showing you the stuff that's in the chapter. The interface is a drop-down list, 4 text boxes, and a button. So as it says there, the customer can be a regular customer, a loyalty customer, a program customer, or an honored citizen customer. And you can get different types of money off depending on what you are. So notice if you're an honored citizen, you get 40% off. All right. So again, I have no doubt that every one of you could build this. You may or may not realize that this thing right here, this line, that's an HR tag, not a BR, which is a line break. That's an HR, which is a horizontal rule. All right. And we've got an H1, a label, or probably a paragraph, a label, and a drop down, a label, and a text box, 3 labels, 3 text boxes, each of which are disabled, another little label there, and a button. That's why I said I have no doubt that each one of you could build that in a matter of minutes. As far as the JavaScript in here is concerned, again, notice what they're doing. They're doing a switch. Sometimes people find this confusing because, wait a minute, you've got a case there and you've got an if inside of a case. It's totally legitimate. All right, so a regular customer, as it says there, a regular customer, if their purchase is between $100 and $249.99, they get 10% off. If it's between $250 and $499.99, they get 25% off. If it's more than $500, they get 30% off. And if it's less than $100, they get nothing off. And then you can see the differences in the other ones too. All right. So with honored, again, the way this reads is, was their purchase less than 500? If it was, they get 40% off. If it was greater than or equal to 500, they get 50% off. Again, you can see down here that they're using some jQuery. All right. But my hope is that I've given you enough examples in both vanilla JavaScript and jQuery that if you had to, for example, you could rewrite this code that's in here using vanilla JavaScript. All right, this is a good place to stop. It is 10:12. Let's come back, please, at 10:25. And we don't have real much to go. We'll pick it up on exceptions, rather. And I'll be back in just a couple minutes. All right, it's 10:25, so I'm going to start back up. In a previous chapter, I believe we talked a little bit. In fact, I think it was chapter 5. We had a whole chapter that talked about error messages and debugging. And at that time, we talked about the fact that basically there's 3 different types of errors. There are syntax errors where you spell a name wrong or something like that. There are logic errors where, it's on your part. You meant to add 2 numbers, but you subtract or whatever. And there's runtime errors. Runtime errors are not discovered until the program is running. And as it says, they're also referred to as exceptions. And they mention there, it says, because exceptions should not occur in a real world application, most programming languages provide a way to handle exceptions that are thrown by the application. So in other words, when you come up with a situation that would normally crash your program, you can try to account for it so that if it does attempt to crash the program, you don't let that happen. That process, as it says there, is known as exception handling. And like many other programming languages, JavaScript handles that by using what's called a try-catch block. All right, we're going to look at one in just a second, but in the try block, you put in code that could conceivably fail. If something in there fails, you've got one or more what are called catch blocks. And depending on how it fails or what the error was, you can have it do certain things. If the code you put in the try block all succeeds, all the catch blocks are just, they're basically skipped. And what you can do if you want to, although it's optional, is after the last catch block, you can put in a finally block. The finally block is executed whether an exception is thrown or not thrown. But again, it is optional. So they're going to show some examples in here, and I don't know if I'm going to like theirs or I might just show you my own in just a second. When you do work with these, there's a name, as it says, that's the type of error that was thrown, and the message that goes along with it. All right. Now, this isn't a bad example, I guess, but it's a try-catch for a calculate future value program. All right. So you attempt to do this, which probably would work. You attempt to do this, and then you attempt to do this. If any one of these things fail, it's going to throw an exception that we're calling error. We're going to write the name of the error plus the message that goes along with it. All right. So you can put in your own message. You can put in a system message. All right. Or you can just, basically there's all sorts of ways that you can handle this. So let's talk about how you might want to use this. All right. I'm going to give you a very simple little example here. All right. So let's say we've got let num1 equal 10. In fact, we won't even do that. We'll say let num1 equal parse int, enter number 1. All right, let num2 equal parse int, enter number 2. All right, so now we've got 2 variables, okay? Then what we're going to do is we're just going to put in some kind of a statement or something. Well, we'll say, let's see, prompt, enter 1 to add, \n, enter 2 to subtract, \n, enter 3 to multiply, \n, enter 4 to divide. All right. So we're asking the person to enter a 1, a 2, a 3, or a 4. Makes sense. All right. But we want to put that into something. We want to put it into a number. So let's say let operation equal, and we'll do a parse int prompt. All right. So we're going to tell them to enter a 1, 2, 3, or 4. That should make sense. All right. So we've got all that in there. Now we can do a switch on that operation. All right. And if they enter a 1, we'll call add them. And we'll pass in num1 and num2. You've seen this kind of thing before. And we'll break. If they put in a 2, all right, we'll call sub them for subtract them. And again, we'll pass in num1 and num2. And we'll break. And I should put this on another line because it'll look nicer. All right. And let's copy these down so I don't have to do a lot of retyping. And if it's a 3, we'll call mul them to mean multiply them. And finally, if it's a 4, we'll call div them to divide them. All right. And if it's anything else, we're just going to return it. All right. Now that shouldn't be a big surprise. That actually should make a lot of sense to everybody right there. All right. We're reading it in 2 numbers. We're telling them to do something. If they do what we ask them to do, put in a 1, 2, 3, or 4, we call that routine. Otherwise, we're not going to do anything. Okay. So add them. N1 and N2. Actually, we can say either function or we could do it as an arrow function. So I'll just do it as the old-fashioned type of function right there. And I'm just going to say return N1 plus N2. Again, this is nothing new. All right. Whoops. Let's quickly copy these. And we'll have sub them. Return N1 minus N2. We'll have mul them, which is number 1 times number 2. Now, and again, we've talked about this kind of thing before. If I put this in and I return this, most of the time it'll work just fine. But if this is a 0, it's going to return infinity. And if they're both 0, it's going to return NaN, which isn't what we want. So what can we do in here? We can do this. We can say try. All right. And we'll come in here and try doing this. And I'm just going to come in here and say if N2 equal 0, I can tell it literally to come in there and throw an error. All right. And then I can say else return N1 divided by N2. This isn't the best way of writing this, but it's a way of writing it. And now I can sit there and say catch. And if it's an error, all right, and I think that I don't think that the caseness would matter in there, but now I can come in and say return illegal divide by 0, something like that. All right. I may have screwed up the syntax. That doesn't matter. What I'm trying to get across to you is in here, you keep doing everything until you find a possible problem. Once you find the problem, you catch it and you handle it. Now, all I'm doing is returning a legal divide by 0. What I could do is I could change this number, just change it to a 1 and then do the divide. But the point is this: when you're doing a try catch, you put in the try block code that could conceivably fail. And in the catch block, you handle it. All right, this isn't the greatest example, but think about this one. I'm not going to write this because I probably screw it up. But let's say, as an example, you were working on a program where you were trying to read a file. All right, you'd probably put a try catch block in there. Why? Because you would want to make sure that the file existed before you went in and tried to read it. If there was no file by that name, it would make no sense. And then you could try that in the try block. And then if you did put in a bad name in the catch block, you could give the user an error message that said there is no file by that name. All right. And that's pretty much how this is used. We go through a lot more with try catch in the AWD1000 C# class. Now, that finally block, which I didn't put in here, normally that's used for what's referred to as housekeeping operations. And what I mean by that is, let's suppose that, going back to that file program, it did work. All right, so you put in a valid file name. Then in a finally block, you might close the file because you're done with it. Or if it didn't work, you'd still close the file because you'd be done with it. So normally, if you're working with something that you have to open, like a file or a database, you close it in the finally block because you'd want it closed anyway. That's typically how these would work. All right. Not only can you, when you encounter an error, not only can you basically have it settled so you have exceptions, you can go in and throw your own exception. And that's what they're doing here. All right, it's kind of what I did before. But when you look at this, there is no actual error that exists in JavaScript that says calculate FV requires investment greater than 0. All right. So what happens is, if you put in a number that's negative, it's going to throw this. And when it throws it, it's going to jump down into the catch. It's going to show you what the error name was and what the error message was. All right. If you put in a number that was then 0, it's not going to hit this. It's going to go down and do this. All right. So there's a lot of ways this can be used. All right. As they say, 3 reasons you might want to throw your own. Well, one way is you might want to just test and make sure your code works. So if you put a try catch in there and it never happens, well, you can force it to happen if you want to by throwing an error. All right. As it says, to throw an error from a function that lets the calling code know that something that you did in there was invalid. You made some kind of a mistake. All right. And then finally, it says to perform some processing and then throw the error again, which isn't done that often. All right. But you can come in and you can throw your own error. And that's what they're talking about in here. All right, regular expressions we've talked about. I've gone out to a couple sites for you. You may or may not remember. One of those sites that we went out to was regex.info. Of course, it's not working right now, but I know there's another one, which is regex101.com. And what you can put in there is you can put in regular expressions and then tell it to run it, and it'll tell you whether or not it worked. Kind of a neat little thing where you can test out your regular expressions. I've also shown you HTML5pattern.com, which has got some built-in stuff for like passwords, zip codes, dates, phone numbers, etc. All right, I think the other one might be regular expression.info. Oh, it doesn't look like it likes that either, but there it is. That's the one I use because there's just so much stuff out there with regular expressions. All right. And again, regular expressions, typically the way that they're used, oops, get rid of that. Typically, at least, the way that regular expressions are going to be used is you want to check to see if something holds something else. It's true that it does, or it's false, and that it does not. All right. So as it says, they're coded patterns that you can use to search for matching patterns in strings. All right. And there are some examples here on the next page. I mentioned this to you before that what you typically do is you come in here and when you are searching for something, you put it between forward slashes. So this is searching for Babbage, for example. All right. And JavaScript has a method that's called test. And as it says right there, it searches for a regular expression in a string. It's a Boolean, so it returns true if it finds the pattern that you're searching for, false if it does not. And they give you a bunch of examples in here. And again, I by no means mean to demean or diminish the importance of this. Regular expressions are used all over the place in programming. All right. There's also, as it says here, some special characters that you can use. Some of these I've actually mentioned to you. All right. For instance, like the \D for digits, and there's some other ones too. Right. These are the ones that I use the most often. Notice that D with a little d is any digit. A big D is anything that's not a digit. A little w is any letter, number, or underscore. A big W is anything that's not a letter, number, or underscore. All right. And you can match these. In other words, do you want this to be there exactly one time? Do you want it to be there multiple times, etc.? The beginning of your pattern, typically you put a caret. The end of your pattern, typically you put a $sign. All right. And if you look at, like, for example, what's in here with this N, you'd replace that with a number. So that would show exactly that many times. If you wanted to show a minimum of that number of times, so if I put a 6 in here, it would be 6 or more. That would be 6 exactly, 6 or more. If I put in 6 to 15, it would be in there. This is often used again with things even like passwords and the like. All right. And the last ones that are in here, 0 or more times, 1 or more times. All right. 0 or more of a previous thing that you put in there. The only way that you learn how to use this is to sit and play with it. All right. Regular expressions. I showed you a couple of them in the example I gave you today. Now, most credit cards have, as they show right there, that kind of a pattern. 4 digits, a hyphen, 4 digits, a hyphen, 4 digits, a hyphen, 4 digits. All right, so they show you how you can set that up. There are other ways of setting up patterns than what's shown here. What they're showing here, by and large, are the most simplistic ways of doing this. There's absolutely nothing wrong with doing it in a simplistic manner. But once you get experience, there's other ways that you can do this, all right, that look more like this. But unless you know what the heck you're doing, that can be very, very, very confusing. All right, so the last thing that's in here is this account profile application. again, I have no doubt you could write this. This is very similar to that email application that we looked at earlier. All right, but now what's different is notice they're validating an email so it's in the right format, validating a phone number that it's in the right format, validating rather a zip code that it's in the right format, and validating a date so that it is a valid date. So again, I'm not going to touch on the HTML. I think you could all build that. But the JavaScript that's in here, and I think this is the last page. Yeah, this is it for this chapter. Again, you'll notice they're using jQuery. All right. I'll let you use some jQuery on your final, but not everything in jQuery. All right. It's important that you have an understanding of how to program utilizing vanilla JavaScript, which means just straight JavaScript rather, no jQuery. All right. So notice in here, they talk about like a date pattern, etc. They've got a bunch of patterns here. That's a pretty ugly email pattern. All right. The phone makes some sense. 3 numbers dash, 3 numbers dash, 4 numbers. The zip 5 or 5-4. The date, the same kind of thing. All right. The date can take more work depending on how nuts you're going to get with it. Okay. But the stuff that's being done in here, you know, having an is valid flag, checking for the presence or absence of something. If it's absent, setting is valid to false. Otherwise, you know, with a message in this case, otherwise doing nothing. So it's very similar again to stuff that we've done. All right, that's it. Now give me 5 more minutes and we'll be done for the period. All right. So today we went further than I thought we would. We did 12 and 13. All right. Tomorrow I may mix this up just a little bit. We may do 14 and 16. I want a whole period to work on arrays. So probably tomorrow we'll go right from 14 into 16. All right, but we should be able to do both of those tomorrow too. All right, we'll see. And that'll be the plan. Okay, and then we do 15 on Thursday. Friday again will be a lab day. And next Monday, starting next Monday, we'll attempt to finish all this up. Remember that on Thursday now, I'm changing the date. If you have not yet turned in JavaScript test number 2 on chapters 4 and 5, and if you want to get some points for it, you won't get 100 if it's perfect because it's late. All right. But if you want to get some points for it, you must turn it in by 8:05 a.m. Thursday, the 9th. All right. So tomorrow again, 14, we'll jump right into 16. Maybe we won't. Maybe we'll jump into 15. I want to go back and reread them. All right. We might do them in order, but we'll do probably 2 chapters tomorrow and 1 or 2 on Thursday. All right. That's all I have. I'll talk to you tomorrow at 8:05 then. Have a good day. Thanks.